Susan Beyer. I've been a longtime fan of Susan Beyer's work from afar. This is actually my first time meeting in person, but we interact online frequently. And one of the things I really love about Susan Beyer's work is that Susan Beyer is a data specialist, and she owns and runs a company called Audience Audit, where she describes herself as, on LinkedIn, it says the head honcho, in fact, the only honcho. I really like that quite a lot. And they do, I mean, Susan's going to explain to us a little more, but essentially they do segmentation and strategic data use for marketing. And they essentially take all the tools that are often embedded in really large corporations and make that expertise and tools and strategic insight available to small and mid-level organizations and agencies. That's my understanding. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And
that's pretty good.
Okay, great, because that's, we all count, as you know, our three main, our motto is demonstrate, democratize, and demystify. And so what we're trying to do is exactly that in all things data. And so the reason that we have Data Amnesty on Wednesdays is that one of the things that we saw happen was a lot of the resources, as the world came sort of data driven, a lot of the resources went to large, powerful corporations. And we found that wasn't that fair in our opinion. And so we're trying to equalize the access to distribution, while at the same time understanding that one of the problems that happened as data got kind of sexy is that the people who rose to the top of many of these small and medium and actually large organizations don't have the same data training as the people under them, and so they're often embarrassed to ask questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So have I explained what you do even close to accurately? Is there anything that you would like to add?
Oh, you absolutely have. I mean, the reason I started Audience Audit almost, I guess, 11 years ago, the height of the last recession, was just because I'd worked in very, very big organizations and I'd seen some great work done from a research standpoint and a data standpoint. And you know, my MBA is in entrepreneurship. I'm a small business person at heart, and I have worked in marketing for a long time. And man, how effective your marketing is, and it just isn't great when only the big guys have that. As a little guy myself, I think everybody needs as much of a level playing field as we can get them. So I think you did a good job explaining it. And then, as you know, the new Fun with Research initiative is specifically designed to get answers to people who are afraid to ask them because they'll look stupid in front of their clients or in front of their employees or in front of whatever. And I don't think anybody should feel that way. So, you know, I'm not a statistician by trade. I'm a market researcher, which is a little bit different. And a lot of people feel like you can't ask questions about research or talk about research unless you have a PhD in statistics. And that's just not true. Although I value those who have a PhD in statistics. My sister works with me. That is her expertise, and she's the brains behind that part of the operation. But it should be accessible. It has to be accessible. We all have to do better understanding it because we're all dealing with it every single day. And as we were talking earlier, like, this pandemic is a perfect example. We are seeing data every day. We are being asked to understand things that are really foreign, that have a direct impact on us. So the more we know, the easier it is for us to ask questions and get comfortable asking questions, the better.
Great. So as you all can see, this is why we invited Susan Beyer to the Data Amnesty. Very kindred spirit in the data world here. And so the reason that I thought of inviting you, Susan, is that we, as you know, we have an anonymous, ongoing anonymous online survey where anybody can submit questions. And somebody last week put in the question, what is segmentation anyway? And I thought, oh hey.
I love that person, whoever they are.
Because often,
It's a great question.
Exactly. And it is a marketing, I came to it as a marketing term, but I spent my first really 10 years strictly in like the nonprofit sector. So doing monitoring and evaluation, collecting data to understand if programs worked and stuff. And it wasn't until a long time, I've been doing that a long time, and that I read some marketing books and thought, I think that we should take what they're doing in marketing and apply it over here. But I still don't feel that I'm an expert in any way. So can you talk to us for a little while about what the heck is segmentation anyway?
Yes, absolutely. So as you know, segmentation is the bulk of what we do at Audience Audit. But really, to demystify segmentation is just putting things into buckets. You know, as humans, we tend to like to categorize things. It makes us easy to process a world full of inputs. So we look at things by size or by color or whatever. That is segmentation. That is how our brain manages this huge flood of input that we get. So when you talk about marketing or data, segmentation is just grouping things or people, companies, products, buyers, prospects, whatever. That's all segmentation is. So I think a lot of people get intimidated by the word, but it's really just chunking things into buckets. That's all it is. And when you look at market research and the use of segmentation, from a data standpoint, from a market research standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, you basically have two options with segmentation. Again, let's put it into buckets that are easy to handle. The first bucket is chunking things out based on something you know. Okay, so this is, let's say your company has data on your customers, how much they have bought from you, how recently, how often, etc. And then you can take that information and say, let's group all of the customers that have spent more than $1,000 with us in the last year, and the customers that have only spent less than 500 to 1,000, and customers who spend under 250 or whatever it is, right? So that's based on information you have on them, okay? You can do this with data your company has. You can do it with data that is readily available, like zip code, geography. What do our Arizona people look like versus our New York people? You can buy data that will take the email addresses that you have and provide you with information on them that these other big data companies have collected, so that you can see maybe they've already assigned life stages to folks, right? And you can say, okay, now based on what I have on these people, I can look at the millennials versus the Gen X's versus whatever. So working with data you have is one way to group people. The other way to do segmentation, which is a work that we do at Audience Audit, is to let the segmentation analysis reveal something you don't know and use that as the basis of the bucket you're creating.
Okay.
So you can do your segmentation, as we said before, by saying, all right, we know we have these kind of people and those kind of people and that kind of people. Let's see how many are in each of those buckets.
Right.
The segmentation we do at Audience Audit is based on attitudes that people have about things, which is not typically something that you have in your data set about them,
right?
Or that you can get by buying from somebody else, right? So you have to use research to understand people's attitudes and let the statistical analysis of that data you're collecting about their attitudes say to you, hey, when we look at all these attitudes, we see people who feel like this, and they're very different from the people who feel like that or who feel like that. Okay. And that gives you a new lens to look at things. That's really all segmentation is. It's a lens to look at a bunch of data that you have. Okay. So there are a bunch of different ways to do it. There are a bunch of reasons to do it any particular way. And the most important thing with segmentation is to understand how that grouping is happening.
Right.
Right. It's true of research in general. Where is this information coming from?
Right.
How did we get it? Because that colors how you need to look at it,
Right.
and how you interpret it and use it. If all of your data comes from customers, you have to understand that you're not really getting insight into people who aren't customers.
Right.
You know, if all your data is coming from millennials, you have to understand that that's not giving you insight into baby boomers. So, like with everything else, segmentation has to be understood in terms of where you're getting the information, how you're grouping it, sort of where it's come from, and it can be incredibly valuable regardless of how you're doing it in sort of managing your initiatives so you're not, from a marketing standpoint, treating everybody exactly the same way, right?
Right.
That's fundamentally what it is.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Look at that. No statistics at all.
That is extremely helpful.
Formulas? No, like orthogonally rotated factor analysis, just plain old human words.
Exactly. Okay, well then let me, speaking of orthogonal factor rotations, one of the questions that often comes up at We All Count is, because we specifically have a focus on equity, and I'm very interested in how we can apply that with segmentation. How do we know that, now that we understand that the segments are basically buckets that we put people in, like clients, if we want to send them like a MailChimp email that would be specifically of interest to them and not bother them with a MailChimp email that they're not going to care about.
Right.
How do we know that those segments actually exist in the world? like how do we know that they're
Right.
meaningful, and that we didn't,
Well,
they're just not some, yeah.
That's the big question.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, it is. Okay.
That's the big question. And it's, to me, it's a function of two things.
Okay.
Where is the data coming from that you're using? So for example, we know anybody involved in market research understands that data has bias built into it.
Yeah.
Based on where it came from and how you got it and how people were able to give it to you.
Yeah.
So for example, you could run a big online survey, but if it doesn't include people who are visually challenged because they can't interact with that interface, then you have to understand that there's a piece of the community that does exist that you're not hearing from, right? And it's the same as if you go to conferences and all the speakers are men, right? There's a perspective that you're not getting, or they're all over 60, right? There's a perspective that you're not getting.
That makes
so that's
sense.
part of it.
Okay.
Where is the data coming? Okay. The second issue that I think affects meaningfulness in segmentation is understanding the difference between our assumptions and what's really happening.
Yeah.
And separate those two things.
Yeah. How do we do that with segmentation?
So honestly, that's the reason that Audience Audit does the work that we do the way we do it. Because most of us, me included, we have assumptions about, say, what our customers want, what they like about us, who they consider our competitor, right? And that's how we usually think about the world, the way we see the world, right? Yeah. It's really important to know whether that's real or not.
Yeah.
Because if you have something on your website that says, hey, which kind of customer are you? And you've got a list of 4 options, you better hope that those are comprehensive and differentiated. Otherwise, people are going to go, none of these apply to me, right? We've all had a survey. You look at the options and you're like, not applicable. None of this makes sense to me.
Right.
And that's the problem with sticking our own assumptions onto other situations. What we try to do with our segmentation is we don't pre-design the buckets.
Okay.
What we do is sort of throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks
Oh,
from
yeah.
an attitudinal standpoint. So we ask respondents to our studies between 30 and 40
Oh,
ratings of attitudinal statements. So we'll say, for example, let's say we're doing a study for people who visit restaurants, right? One of the attitudes that we ask them to rate might be going out to dinner is a special treat. They can agree with that completely, disagree with it completely, or something in the middle, right? What we don't know yet is whether that is a differentiating thing for people, right? So we're going to ask 40 of these things, then we're going to let the math tell us which of them are linked for which people, and basically organically bubble up something that says, this is what's happening among the people you surveyed.
right.
And sometimes we see things that match our expectations, and a lot of times we see things that are surprising, that don't match our expectations. But because of the size of the study and the number of people we have involved and how we sourced it, we can say this is a statistically reliable representation of the community we are trying to understand.
Right.
So there's always our bias, but trying to find ways to let something like the math do its work without our influence can be very powerful. So for example, when we analyze this set of attitudes in a study, each attitude just gets a code. Each of those statements just gets a code. So the person doing the mathematical crunching doesn't even have the opportunity to look at that and go, those two don't seem like they go together, and potentially influence, even unintentionally, the output.
Wow. That is a great idea. We are adding that to our toolkit. I did not have that in my toolkit. That's a great idea.
Powerful. It's really powerful. And of course, the end result is you get this thing and it's like Christmas. You open up the box. What is it? What does that look like?
Interesting.
And if you do it right and you've included the right people and you have enough of them, you can look at that and go, okay, this changes our understanding of things. And from a marketing standpoint, attitudinal information is incredibly helpful when you're trying to message, because nobody wants an email that says, hello, woman 25 to 49. Like, it's just not, it's not relevant. It's not compelling, but a lot of us are functionally doing that. We're either treating everybody the same, or we're saying, hey, you paid a lot with us last year, so we think you want this.
Right. Sure, absolutely. And would you say, Susan, that it would be accurate that in addition to using something like segmentation for marketing, let's say that I am the student services director at the University of Toronto right now, and of course all my students are now experiencing, the societal upheaval, but they're also experiencing disruption at the University of Toronto. So with the existing data that I would have access to internally, like, do you think that segmentation could be used in that setting as well, to kind of figure out, like, to target COVID responses to students trying to, we have limited resources, right? I mean, just to make clear, I do not work for the University of Toronto. This is a hypothetical internet world.
You have to differentiate between the data you have and the assumptions you're making, right? Okay. This is the old problem of, oh, she owns a Volvo and has 3 kids and a job, so she must be stressed and safety oriented, right? The first is facts, the second is our assumption. So for example, at a university in this situation, you might target specific messaging to students who are the first in their family to attend college. Right? Or come from a particular background, right? That to you suggests they may have fewer resources available among family, friends, expertise, financially, whatever, to deal with the current situation. So you may choose to say, hey, we know this may be new for your family, navigating this process. We have some resources to help you, okay? The first is information you have about them. The second is the assumption you're making based on what you have, that they may be in a tight spot, right? This is what's happening with elderly people getting special hours at grocery stores. Okay. We know you may be overwhelmed with the crowds. You may not be able to get here in time for the things that you need. So we're going to assume that getting access earlier before everybody else is helpful.
Okay.
It's not about assumption, and it's not going to hurt anybody, right?
Right.
But it's based on sort of what you know about your students and their families and their backgrounds and how you think you can help, right?
Okay.
What you might find if you did attitudinal segmentation is to understand that across the economic spectrum, across the spectrum of kids who are the first in their family to go and kids who come from a long history of college graduates, there are kids who are absolutely freaking out, okay? Kids who feel like this is going to be okay, my family's helping me, I'm solid, we're going to be all right. Kids who are like, forget it, I'm not going to do college anymore because this is just too much drama for me, right? And that can be happening across the spectrum regardless of our assumptions.
Right, absolutely. And
so you can be very, very helpful with the information you have.
Okay. So you could get a more new, like if they had information, so they might have, a university might have real-time information about like, you know, what students are responding to. They could even do an online survey, and then they could take the information they already have, combine it with some attitudinal data that they have just collected or just been able to figure out how to get, and then do something that's a little less kind of just maybe based on your stereotypes about somebody's economic situation, and actually do a more nuanced analysis that takes into account their economic information, but also attitudinal.
That's right. That's exactly right. You know, as a market researcher, my go-to is always going to be just ask. Just ask.
Right.
If there's something you don't know and we can ask instead of assume, let's see if we can ask.
Okay.
And that's a lot of what we're doing in small organizations, is helping them ask, right? And it doesn't have to be big and scary. When I started doing market research, online surveys like this could cost $250,000 to do. I mean, because lots of people didn't have the internet, so you had to have a bunch of different ways to get people. We didn't have the computing power that we have now, so processing all this data was incredibly time consuming and expensive because you had to have access to that computing power. It was a big deal. That is not the case anymore.
Right.
I mean, pretty much everybody has some kind of access to the internet, even if it's just on their phone, right? You can very easily use online survey tools, and they have lots of help, you know, Survey Gizmo, SurveyMonkey. Those tools have lots of help about how to build questions well, you know, how to do all those kinds of things. So it's much more accessible now for people to just ask.
Excellent. Okay. One last question that you just touched upon. So if people are used to collecting kind of not attitudinal data, but kind of more, well, just not attitudinal data. Yeah, demographic data, or, you know, if you're working in the social sector, you know, like, did this program have an impact on you? Do you have more money? Do you have more food? Satisfaction data.
Yep.
Exactly. How would you suggest somebody get started learning how to phrase an attitudinal question, or what is a good, I mean, I'm not asking you to teach us here and now. I'm just saying, I wouldn't know how to do it, like, other than like, you know, do you value going out to eat or whatever? And I can see already that you have a much better, is there a book, or is there a resource, or like, even what words would be Google?
I mean, I don't think there's a book. I mean, attitudinal segmentation is just this weird little corner of research that I don't, a lot of people I talk to, even if, I mean, we do work for very large companies who've never even heard of this. So I wish there was a book. There's not a book. The approach that we developed, we built. But I guess even if you want it, so say your example, right, with your students, even if you're not going to do a segmentation per se, but you want to understand who's feeling really overwhelmed, right? Who's ready to give up, who's feeling optimistic about those things, right? You can think about kind of the categories of attitudes that you want to ask about. How optimistic are you that college is going to continue and you're going to be okay? How worried are you about your financial situation? How concerned, right? So you can sort of categorize these things. And then, like any other survey question, which you're very familiar with, you want to try to avoid bias in asking the question.
Right.
So instead of saying, aren't you so excited to come back to school, which has bias built in?
Yeah, okay.
You say, how do you feel about coming back to school? And you give them an unbiased and equalized range of options. Okay? Like, never going to happen. Absolutely positive I will be back at school, with equal options around the middle, right?
Okay.
So you just have to think about, like, how can I avoid putting my opinion into this question and ask it as neutrally as possible? So how do you feel about which of the following affect you? To what degree is this affecting you right now, right? Trying to think of them as neutral questions. And then, Heather, even if you don't do a big segmentation analysis after this, you could pull the kids who are really on the far end of anxiety, frustration, whatever, and maybe pair them with kids who are feeling really positive about things and say, we've got sort of a buddy program here. Let's try to help the kids who are feeling worse and then list the kids who are feeling better, you know, and have more positivity.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So that does seem doable.
Online about how to write an unbiased question. There's tons of advice online about how to write a good survey question of any kind you want to write. So that's easy to Google.
Yes. Okay. We know how to Google that. And then, and then if we really need attitudinal help, maybe my recommendation might be to reach out and hire Susan Meyer. Okay.
To talk about it, we're going to be having more on Fun with Research over time. So, you know, we're doing that weekly. So, and people can submit questions to Fun with Research. So just like with your program, if you have a question and your name isn't going to get shared if you ask a question, I'm just going to reach out and let you know that your question is coming up on this week's show. But
okay, so how do people submit questions to? First of all, how do they find Fun with Research? I should say, Fun with Research is an amazing, awesome YouTube series, which I am enjoying and sending to lots of people.
Oh, thank you.
And I am learning. I know it is, and you've produced so much in a month, and I'm learning so much. I mean, I've been doing research for more than 20 years, and I'm learning so much. So, one, how do they find it? And two, how do we submit a question? Because I didn't know we could submit a question.
Yeah, so Fun with Research is on YouTube. That's the channel, Fun with Research. And I'm usually sharing those. We come out every Friday with a video. They're about 4 or 5 minutes long. And that'll be on my LinkedIn or my Facebook. But you can also go to funwithresearch.com. That'll have all of the videos plus a longer post about that topic. We've got some free downloadable resources. So some free you can download, like, how do I find respondents for my survey? If I want to use a panel, how much does that typically cost? Like, what makes a good survey client, research client, or whatever. So those are free, and none of it's gated. We don't need emails or anything like that. And then on that page, there's a place where you can click a button and submit a question.
Okay,
easy as pie.
Okay, and so once this video gets up on YouTube, I'll put the links to all of that in right underneath the video. So if you're watching this on YouTube, just click down there and you'll find Fun with Research, where you can see the answers and you can also submit a question. And just like Data Amnesty, it can be anonymous. You do not have to.
It's not a selling thing at all. It's just let's get everybody's baseline level up a little bit so we don't all feel so squeamish when we get asked one of these questions.
Exactly. It's so amazing to meet somebody who's basically trying to do the same thing. So thank you. This has been incredibly helpful. Would you mind staying for 1 more or 2 more minutes and I can see if anybody live has a question?
I'm happy to stay as long as
all right.
Questions, you bet.
Does anyone who's online want to type a question into the chat? And if not, if you don't want to ask a question associated with your name, you can email it to me, or you can go over to research.com and funwithresearch.com and email it to Susan. I'll give you a minute to decide.
And even if you're too scared to ask your question, when I started Fun with Research a couple months ago, I made a list of questions that I've been asked about research.
Right.
And I have a weekly question through June of 2021 right now. So if people ask a question, that gets at the front of the line.
Right.
But there's no end of questions that people have about research. I have content for forever.
Yeah, no, that is true. I feel the same way. Content forever, and I do think it's because, well, personally in the data science world, when it became very kind of when whoever, Hal, whatever from Google said that it was like the sexiest job ever, being a data scientist became a source of status and power. Yeah. And a lot. I would attend. And mystery, and there was a lot of cachet to speaking in jargon. Like speaking in jargon and making things sound as hard as possible became a very easy way to retain power, charge more money, and not reveal that you don't know what you're talking about a lot of the time. And so I take great joy in fighting with people who want to do that. Excellent. We have a question.
This is a great question.
Okay, great. So I'll read it out loud for people who can't see it. With attitude rating questions, is it usually better to do a 5-point scale or a 10-point scale, or does it always depend?
I love this question so much, and I'm actually recording this week on Fun with Research about this question of Likert scales, right? That's what these scales are called. They're oppositional. They're called a Likert scale. You know, disagree completely, agree completely. I love this question so much because there's a lot of debate about the best way to handle Likert scale. So I'll tell you my perspective on it, and then you can Google and read 4,000 other people that disagree with me. So one of the big questions is, how big should a scale be, right? 5, 10, 20, whatever. I will tell you that for the work we do, where we're doing this crunching on that set of attitudinal statements, I need granularity. You can imagine having a 3-point Likert scale. Disagree, agree, neither, okay? That doesn't give you much to work with when you're trying to understand the variation between people, because everybody only has 3 options to pick from. So the longer your scale, the more granularity we have. For our surveys at Audience Audit, our scale goes from 1 to 6, which, if you think about it, means that there is not a center point on our scale that people can choose. And here's the discussion about that. There's a lot of debate about whether you should have a middle point on your Likert scale. I don't feel that you should, for this reason. First of all, when we're talking attitudes, these are all things that every individual person should be able to have a perspective on. There's nothing that's not applicable to them. There's nothing that they couldn't understand. And I want to force people to tell me, even in the mildest way, that they agree a little bit or disagree a little bit. So we don't have a center point. The other thing is, there's lots of research that has shown that in online surveys, sometimes people use the middle point just to get through the question.
Right.
Right? They use it either as a, I'm not sure, or as a, I don't feel like investing the time to think about this.
Right.
And if you use those responses in your survey, you may think you're seeing a neutral position, when in fact, what that's representing is something really different, which is, I don't want to spend the time to take this survey, or this is not applicable to me, depending on the kind of question you're asking, right? So my opinion is, we don't have a center point on our scales.
Yeah.
There's 6 points long without a center. But if you're not doing attitudinal things, and you may have statements that you want people to rate that don't apply to them or they've never
Right.
experienced. Then what you want to do is have a not applicable option separate from the scale so that they
Okay.
can, if you do have a center point in your scale, you have to consider what you're really seeing. And what a lot of people will do is pull those responses out because we don't really know what the intent of the respondent was when they chose that. And there's been a bunch of research showing that. So that's
Very.
my opinion. Have enough granularity so that you can do the work you need to do with that data and understand differences with people and not go crazy, right? 15-point Likert scales don't help anyone. It's too much, right? And label them clearly, make sure they're even, and then decide based on what you're doing, whether you need to have a center point that you think is neutral, what you're going to do with that information when you get it, knowing that many people didn't say neutral, they said something else. And should you have a do not apply or I don't understand option off the side of that scale for them to choose.
Perfect.
That's my vibe on Likert scales.
That is extremely helpful. I myself often wonder about that. We have one more question.
It's a big debate. You can fall on either side, but there's a lot of good conversation about it. So I love that question. Thank you. That was a great question.
Excellent. Well, I think we have another really good question too. Thank you very much for the talk. The insights are very helpful. How can respondent fatigue be resolved?
Oh, such a good question. So I think that survey development, any kind of research you do, you have to come from a place of respect and respectful treatment of the people that you are asking to participate. This takes time. It takes intellectual energy. It's an opportunity cost for something else that they could be doing. And the reality is, while incentives are important, for most survey respondents, that's not the reason they're doing it. It's because they like being asked about their opinion. It's because they believe that sharing it will improve something for them or for somebody else, right? Or they like sharing their expertise, whatever. So fatigue is a real problem. And to me, fatigue is part of not thinking about your respondents. I'll tell you, our surveys, our attitudinal segmentation surveys are 15 minutes long. That's long for a survey. So there are a variety of things you could do to diminish respondent fatigue. And then we'll talk about what you do to eliminate fatigue to the best you can in your data, the results of fatigue in your data. To eliminate fatigue, there's a few things you need to do. First of all, write a good survey. Don't just throw everything in the kitchen sink in there. Make sure that everything you're asking, you have a reason to be asking, and you have a reasonable expectation that regardless of what the results of that question are, it's going to be useful for you, right? So if you don't know what their favorite color is, you don't necessarily need to ask it unless maybe you're a clothing or a makeup retailer, right? So think about the data that you're asking for. Write a survey that reduces fatigue to the extent that you can. So this means breaking up long series of questions. This means don't ask for a ton of open-ended stuff. That's more fatiguing than anything else, asking people to type in how they feel about something. So don't overdo that. Think about, if you give them a list and you say other, do you really need to know what the other is? Is that going to be helpful? So industry is a perfect example here, right? We do B2B work. Sometimes we'll say, are you in any of the following industries? And if they're not, do you really care what industry they're in, or is it just enough to know that they're not in one of the ones you listed? Right? Write questions well.
Yeah.
Tell people how long your survey is going to be before they choose to take it, and don't lie to them about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to think they're taking a 3-question survey and realize that they're 20 minutes in and there's no end in sight. Like, not cool, right?
Right.
Be respectful. Tell them at the beginning how long it's going to take. One thing that's really helpful from a fatigue standpoint is to know that the majority of survey takers in our work now are taking surveys on mobile devices.
Right.
So you have to understand how your survey is going to manifest on a phone, on a little phone. So if you're doing a lot of rating scales, understand that dots are better than sliders. Understand how your particular survey instrument manifests on mobile, and with Survey Gizmos, any of these kinds of things, you have an option to view how your survey looks on a mobile device, and to choose whether it's just going to do one item per screen or whether it's going to do all 14. Like, so lots of options there. So that's how you could help reduce fatigue. Now, fatigue completely. One of the things you can do in your data is look at signs that someone was fatigued, suggesting they're, and eliminate them from your analysis. So are people speeding through your survey? Are they patterning responses, all threes, or they did an X or a Christmas tree, or, you know, those kinds of things. And maybe say, I appreciate that that person participated in my survey, but I'm not going to use their data in my analysis. Because it's just not very good quality. And again, all of the online tools have options to look at your data for you and help you eliminate those kinds of responses. So that's not something you necessarily have to do by yourself. The tools can help you with it. So I hope that's helpful from a fatigue standpoint. It comes to respect, good quality, and transparency and honesty in executing your research, and then looking at your data and eliminating anything that may be a result of fatigue or just low interest level to get to the end and get the incentive, so that you don't include those kind of garbage responses in the analysis that you're going to use to drive strategies and tactics moving forward after the research.
Perfect. That was an incredibly helpful answer.
Too much. My problem isn't talking, it's stopping.
No, we're not even close to too much, Susan. Not even close. No way. That's extraordinarily helpful. And the person asking the question says, thank you, with a happy face. And so I think they agreed that was not too much, because it was really, really helpful to have a tip that approaches it from both sides, like how to treat your respondents with respect. And I had a laugh when you were saying in market research a 15-minute survey is a long time, because in the development sector, like an hour-and-a-half survey is standard. but I do not think that is, I don't, that's not good.
But here's the thing. Here's the other thing that we do that helps understand where the problem is. Our surveys are anonymous. All of our surveys are anonymous for our clients.
Right.
So respondents don't have to provide any information at all. Another piece of respect, right? They don't have to provide anything. However, at the end of our surveys, we ask respondents if they would be willing to engage in more research or conversations about this topic with us. We get anywhere from 40 to 80% of participants to volunteer for more research. And it's completely optional, okay? Doesn't have anything to do with the incentive, doesn't, whatever. If you're taking a 15-minute survey and at the end of it, you're volunteering for more, that's a pretty good sign that they felt you were respectful of them during that process. So that's one of the things we use to assess how are we doing on our survey work? How are we doing with being respectful? And that's something that anybody could ask at the end of their survey. A question like, how did you feel about this survey? Did we respect your time? Was it pleasant to take, or whatever? And they don't even have to provide any contact information. Just ask them at the end and look at that data over time and use it to understand how you could make your surveys better.
That is such a good suggestion. I am adding that to all my surveys.
You'll always get some people who complain, but it can be really helpful assessing like, okay, are we being respectful of the people that we're asking? In a lot of cases in our studies, these people are clients, customers of our clients. So the last thing you want to do as a researcher is piss off your client's customer base. That's important.
Fantastic.
Work.
Yeah, exactly.
All their customers are complaining about your
Excellent. Well, this has been an incredibly, incredibly useful hour. Absolutely one of our best data amnesties ever.
Oh, thank you. I loved it.
The wonderful Susan Beyer, all her information is down there in the write-up, all the links to hear more of her, watch more of funwithresearch.com. And Data Amnesty will be back next Wednesday at noon. And you can find us on Zoom. And, oh, yes, right. I'm supposed to share my screen so that you can see where to find us. Let me do that.
And if you're ever short of rants for Data Amnesty, just let me know, because that ranting is what I do.
Okay, well then absolutely we'll have you back, because we love to rant here. That's really, you know, the basis of We Out Count. Like, what place for to rant. This is where you can email me if you want to ask a question through email. That's my Twitter feed. You can find the links to the anonymous question submission on that Twitter feed, as well as the Zoom links. We may have to password protect the Zoom link now that people have time to be Zoom trolls, but for now we're not password protected. So, and thanks again to our special guest, Susan Beyer. It was fantastic, and I hope you're all hanging in there. And
no doubt. Yourself. Stay safe, and everybody, you too, Heather. Lovely to chat with you. What a nice start to my morning. We'll talk to you later.
Talk to everybody later. Bye.